We just wait a few seconds for people to join this webinar. So we're going to start on the hour. To those who are coming in a little bit early, welcome. And today's 45 minutes on decarbonising shipping, specifically how Cargill is working with others to make zero carbon shipping a reality. And I'll introduce the panelists for today in a moment. But here's to shipping, right? Let's get into that today and its relevance for aluminum. You'll know that in a couple of a few weeks' time, we plan to launch the new versions of our performance and chain of custody standards. Indeed, we have a board meeting this week to look to adopt those standards. And as part of the performance standard, there's a mandate for all certifying entities to develop 1.5 degree aligned pathways. Oh, what does that mean? Currently, 1.1 billion tons of CO2 emitted by the aluminum sector, and the industry is going to need to get that down to around 50 million tons by 2050. So more than 95% emissions reduction. And that's not just in terms of its own emissions, it's Scope 1 and Scope 2, it's also its indirect emissions. And indeed, in our performance standard, we talk about pathways that are relevant for both direct and indirect emissions. Today, transportation is responsible for around 3 to 5% of aluminium sector emissions. That's only to semi-fabricated, though. It doesn't include all of those downstream emissions from fabricated goods. And as the industry decarbonises in the future, the share of those emissions will necessarily go up. But we're going to need to reduce down emissions by shipping emissions by around 15 to 20% by 2030. 60% by 2040 and 90% by 2050. So that's the context for today. It's easy to say that, right, in the aluminum sector, to say, yeah, we need to reduce those down. But what does the shipping industry really plan to do in order to realize those things? Well, for that, I'm really delighted to introduce our panelist for today, Jan Dieleman, who's the president of Cargill Ocean Transportation. With more than 20 years at Cargill, he's successfully managed freight, grain, energy, and transportation businesses in North America and Europe. He's a passionate, respected advocate for sustainable shipping. He's a board member of Global Maritime Forum, the chair of RightShip, advisory board member of Lloyd's Register, and the chair of Sea Cargo Charter Association. I think we'll hear about some of those organizations today as well. So we're delighted to welcome Jan to this 45 minutes on, and he and I both look forward to answering your questions. So please use that box. Welcome, Jan. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me, actually. So I'm really looking forward to this.
Yeah, no, it should be a good one. And if your questions come in, we're going to do GHGs, but if people have questions on other issues around shipping, I know you're ready to take those questions as well. But maybe we can start with greenhouse gases. And I said before, there's, for the aluminum sector, it's going to be challenging for our Scope 1s and 2s. It's about energy-related emissions reduction, but it's also about new technology development, the development of technologies that currently don't exist. Can you take us through what actions you're taking to decarbonize your future operations, but also current operations as well?
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Chris. Maybe it's good to give a bit of an overview of what we do and what the industry is actually doing. So for people that don't know Cargill, it's a large multinational involved in a lot of movement of goods, mainly around food and feed, but also in the industrial space, in the bio-industrial space. So we see a lot. We have a shipping business which is relatively large. Around 700 ships on the water at any given time, so all kind of sizes, mainly on the bulk side. So we see a lot, and we're a leader in the space, and we also want to be a leader in some of the ESG debates, right? And that comes with that. And there's not always easy solutions and answers, but we really want to be out there and try to solve this together. And you will hear this together kind of notion a lot. Going to the industry, it's interesting that you say 2 to 3% as the number, because that's also kind of the number on global emissions in total that shipping is actually producing. So it's actually not that far off from the aluminium kind of industry with a billion tons plus of emissions. So although it might be small, if you add it all up in the world, it's huge, right? And it's still the most efficient way of transport. 90% of the goods is transported by sea. So, but there's still a big responsibility there to get things going. So what you have in the industry is a bit of a confusion, to be honest. You have a lot of private companies aligning to the 1.5, where you were just talking about earlier. But we have something which is called the IMO, which is the regulator for international shipping, which has set an ambition for 50% reductions by 2050. There's a lot of pressure to up that ambition, and that might come out in the next couple of months, or who knows how long it will take. So there's a bit of confusion, but we ourselves have basically hooked ourselves up to the 1.5 and really focusing on 30% emissions by 2030, which is the real first milestone. So that's basically where the industry is. In terms of decarbonization, what can you do? What can you not do? I think you need to split a little bit the road, how to get to these kind of ambitious goals. And we've really focused on initially on things that we can control ourselves, and a lot of it is in the supply chain. So there's a lot to be done there. Efficiencies, scaling up, making sure that you avoid certain assets which are just substandard. And then there's a whole middle ground, we call it a little bit, which is where you need to gather with other people, and which are technologies that have a payback, but it takes a bit longer. So you're talking about wind here, you're talking about energy saving devices and all these kind of things. And then the bigger question, and we all know, in order to get to the targets, we need to get to zero carbon fuels. And if you want to get to zero carbon fuels, that will take a time. That's also competing with some of the industries, right? And we all know that. Everybody's talking about the hydrogens, the ammonia, and the methanol kind of green fuels. And that is where we really need to collaborate. And this is where we collaborate with people like the Global Maritime Forum in the Getting to Zero Coalition, with the Merce McKinney Institute, which is doing a lot of work there. There's another institute in Singapore. And this is where the industry really needs to collaborate, because that is the real tough nut somehow to crack, I would say.
Are you, as those discussions are happening on, you know, as you say, you're not the only industry that wants access to those fuels. Are some of those discussions happening cross-sectorally, or are they, you know, is it all a little bit siloed?
I think it's, to be honest, I think it's still a little bit siloed. I think it's for the right reasons, though. I think every industry wants to take its own responsibility and doesn't want to say, well, it's somebody else that needs to go first. So I think there's a lot of good intent, but I think there's more coordination needed. Especially, there is numbers going around in the shipping industry that 80% of the investment to make zero carbon fuels will have to be taken on land. And in the end of the day, we're all going to somehow be competing for the green energy, right? Because we don't want to just move to ammonia or to hydrogen. We want to move to green ammonia and hydrogen and methanol. So I think that's where the challenge is. There is talks, but I think there's more coordination absolutely needed.
Is that, and is that, I mean, are you seeing kind of regional specificity in some of that? Are there kind of hubs for the development of some of these things, or is there a global spread? Because it's a global sector, right? Yours the same as ours for now.
Yes. No, I think if we have another complexity, right? Our assets are flexible, right? You can move them around, which is a bit different than I think in your industry. I don't think you can just pick up a plant and just.
I don't know. The Chinese do that occasionally.
Yeah, but it's a bit more complicated, I think. So that is one specificity that we have. We have also an IMO, as I said earlier, which is a UN body. So it's extremely difficult to regulate beyond minimum standards, I would say, because it's always a negotiation. And so what you see is some jurisdictions are going faster. There's a lot happening in Western Europe, as you know. There's a lot happening in Australia as well. There's also things happening in China, which is maybe not that much talked about, but there's clearly things happening. But when you're talking about carbon prices and where the green premium is somehow to be paid for now is more in Western Europe than anywhere else, I would say.
And by the sound of things, not happening faster. I mean, it's just the access to that fuel for that, what you said, the 30% by 2030.
Yeah, and that's exactly, I think, why we as Cargill have taken this route, right? We've taken the route that yes, we want to be involved in the zero carbon fuels. We are going to pull our weight there, but we can't just sit there and wait for those to happen. In the meantime, you also need to start doing other things. So there's a lot to be done by scaling up, for instance. There's a lot to be done by intermediate technologies. There's a lot of things to be done with wind, right? And we talked about it. You can see the background that I have. Because wind is one of these technologies that even if you combine it with the future fuels, you have a huge saving. So there is things that you can invest on and get going now that actually are not regret spent or later on. So I think there's a lot of things to be done. I think one learning that we did have over the last couple of years, though, and we started ourselves in 2017, is really understanding your current emissions. So it's around creating transparency, talking about one language around how you measure emissions. And from there, you can really have a good discussion with people around you to really start making an improvement plan. And that is where the Sea Cargo Charter comes in, where there's a lot of work being done by individual companies, but we're really starting to make this into an industry practice on how you measure emissions and how you hold yourself accountable for somehow the trajectory, how to get to these goals.
And so that's the measurement. And I think for aluminum, I'll talk a bit about the aluminum side of things, that the measurement has been relatively simple, scope 1 and 2. Even the scope 3s are relatively simple for someone else because they're their scope 1 and 2. It's the communication of those emissions along the value chain. So is that part of your work as well? Do you get those kind of requests from your customers, from fleet operators and others for that kind of?
Yes, and yes, and I think what is interesting, when we started the Sea Cargo Charter, we had to make a choice on to what methodology and to what kind of ambition level we were going to hook ourselves up. And we decided at that time to really focus on the IMO because that was the one that was actually known. But with that, we had a couple of issues which are clearly coming up now, which is one of them is the ambition level, where we talked about earlier. But the other one is also the whole world is looking at life cycle emissions, whereas the shipping industry is still looking at operational emissions just on board of the ships. So what you see is that the Sea Cargo Charter is really trying to be that bridge where actually your seagoing component actually fits into the measurement of the rest of your supply chain, which was a kind of a missing link. So there's a lot of people asking us questions. The good thing is if you can start creating some transparency, and we do this a lot with our customers, where we say, this is your footprint over the last 5 years, and not just one number, but really go into voyage by voyage and building it up. You can actually start seeing where some of the emissions are maybe outliers, and you start really understanding why that is. And then you can really have a good conversation on things you can already do today. Because as I said earlier, even if you are willing to do the green fuels, the first ships with engines able to take it are only going to be on the water or in 2024, 2025. So there's a lot of things to be done in the meantime.
And so some of those, you talked about wind and some of these kind of other, I was going to say nascent technologies, but thousands of years old technologies. Is that is that possible to retrofit your existing vessels, or is that again looking at kind of new vessel life cycles?
No, so what we do, a lot of the energy saving devices, we call them ESDs, you can do on retrofit. So it's a bit complicated because normally a ship goes into dry dock once every 5 years, and that's a good moment that you can actually upgrade the ship. So you're talking about paints, you're talking about things that you can do on the rudders, there's things you can do in the engine room already. So that's things you can actually do today. On the wind as well, the wind you can retrofit. So we have a prototype which is identified, and we're talking to the yard, we're talking to class to get all the approvals, and that will be clearly initially based on retrofit because we need things on the water sooner than later. But there's also a big opportunity to optimize a ship for wind, and that's something we want to do as well. But if you look at the lead time, that's going to take another 3-4 years, and we just need to get going.
And so those kind of changes, I mean, let's say for the aluminum sector, those, let's say, efficiency, retrofitting of existing technologies, the gain you're going to get in GHGs is probably 15% or so on existing capacity. Do you have an idea of the kinds of impacts that those sorts of changes would have on your fleet's emissions or on the voyage emissions?
Yeah, no, I think the interesting piece is, though, if you can start combining some of these technologies, and that is what we're looking at, because if you take wind plus ESDs, you can in certain areas, and it all depends on wind is also very much where you deploy it, right? Because in some places there's more wind than in other places, very simply put. But if you put it all together, you can actually probably get to 30%. And then we didn't even talk about drop-in biofuels that you could also use on top of that. So I think if you really put all levers, and also let's also look at the supply chains, right? Because we still have a lot of cases where we're speeding up to sit in a lineup for 4 or 5 days. And if you take all these things together, I think the 30% reduction is actually something that could be achievable by 2030. Wow. After that, we need to move to the zero carbon fuels.
Yeah. Okay. I want to come back to, but in a moment, come back to the operation of the fleet, or the systemic view, as you just described. We have a question that's come in about how much consideration is being given to nuclear energy. So rather than these kind of small scale changes, is actually a whole scale shift. Certainly in the aluminium sector, it likely needs to form part of a decarbonised future. Certainly forms part of a present. So what about for shipping?
Yeah, no, I think it's a super fair call out, and I think, to be honest, that all solutions are still on the table as far as we're concerned. We've made a point internally to not declare a winner, because I think that would be wrong. I also think what you need to do is, when you talk about the maritime industry, you probably need to look at it more from a sectorial point of view. Because if you're talking maritime, you're talking anything from fisher ships to cruise ships to large bulk carriers, and the solutions of these subsectors could be very different. Coming back on nuclear, that has clearly been something that people have been talking about. Nuclear is around and is already tested on the maritime, right? That there is military ships on nuclear, so it's a proven technology. I think there's a lot of hesitation around it, given the nature of the business, where you actually move assets around. And I think there's a nervousness around nuclear on board of ships. So I think that's still a little bit too far away. But there could well be that nuclear could be one of the power sources of the green fuels that we need, right? We're talking about the methanol, we're talking about the ammonias and the hydrogen. So I don't think we can exclude or should exclude nuclear on the pathway to zero.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned there as well about the maritime sector being highly diverse. Can you give some insights on the materiality of emissions between those different bits? Millions of small-scale fishing vessels versus.
Yeah, and I think that is an interesting approach in the end of the day, right? Because as I said earlier, everybody wants to do something. What I found fascinating is 5 years ago in shipping, everybody said, like, no, it's too complicated. We're already very low in emissions, so it's not going to happen. And now everybody sits there, is like, yes, we want to do something, but can you please help me, because I don't know what to do. So the narrative has changed a lot, which I think is a good starting point. And I do think that the biggest emissions are coming from the larger ships, right? And especially on the container side, there's a big chunk of emissions coming from there. There's also the fleet that goes the fastest. So I think there's a lot of things there. So I think there is this notion nowadays of green corridors, and you might have heard of this, is really trying to break down the overall ambition and trying to focus on certain routes, A to B, and really get some specific subsidies and work done on certain routes in order to really make it a bit of a bite-sized chunk. Because otherwise we have the risk that in 4 years we're still talking about all these concepts, but still haven't been able to deploy something, because the deploying and the scalability, that is the real challenge.
So we're going to talk about financing later on. it's a similar issue for us in the aluminum sector. Yeah. One more question on that kind of materiality. How many operators are there that represent those big ships then? Are we talking 5 or 6 that you could kind of get together and affect change, or is it a larger cohort?
Yeah, and it depends very much per industry, and I by no means want this to come across that other sectors should be doing more than us, because I think we all have a role to play. But if you look in the container sector, it's a highly concentrated market, right? And that's why you see a lot of activity there. It's a lot easier to pull off. You got 4 or 5 companies which are very close also to the end user, right? And to be honest, the green premium is easier to get collected closer to the end user than when you're sitting in the middle of the supply chain. And I think that's probably the same for you guys. So I think there's a lot. I think if you get to the bulk side, it is super fragmented. We are one of the largest operators there with 700 ships, and that's not even 2% of the market. So it gives you a little bit of an idea of how fragmented it is. And that's also why I think it's important that you need an organization like the IMO to at least regulate a minimum standard. And to be honest, that's what they're doing. There's a lot of new regulation coming at us. In 2023, you got something which is called the EEXI, which sets kind of a minimum standard for ships on the water, which is similar to what you see in the car industry, right? Where there's a minimum kind of expectation on cars on the roads. And then the CII, which is really around carbon intensity, where you're going to get penalized if your carbon intensity is higher than a certain pathway. So there is things coming, but we need somehow the progressive first movers to take the lead here as well.
Is that so? That carbon intensity, how's that done? Is it per ton per
Yeah,
voyage? How do you
it's a transport work. It's very similar to the sea cargo charter approach, where you're really looking at the cargo intensity of moving your goods, which includes the ballast lag, right? And that's a lot of times people tend to forget about that. Ships are sometimes 50% of the time sailing empty.
Yeah, a systemic issue that I think is also part of the discussion, right? You mentioned about that mid-chain, the difficulty when you're not talking to your final customers. The question has come in around the customer conversations on Scope 3 emissions, and it's a question that is coming a lot on the aluminum side. So any insights you could offer on how those customer expectations and conversations went would be great. For us, it's very challenging when you have multiple end users. So.
Yeah, no, I think what we see, and I'm not talking just as Cargill, but as an industry, I think you start seeing certain pockets of industry within the bulk space that are starting to become a little bit more ready to pay a premium. And I think some of it is coming from the aluminum side as well, which is closer to some of the green movement, right? Into cars, into coffee cups and stuff like that. So we see bits and pieces starting to pay more attention to this than others. There's also a lot actually coming from the mining side, which is something you wouldn't expect, but there's a lot from that side. Listed companies are clearly feeling the pressure, and what is also what we see in Cargill is Scope 1 and 2. Yes, that is the big chunk, but it's also super hard, right? Because it's the core of your business, and it's super hard to actually get some traction there. So a lot of people start also now looking at the Scope 3, because there's actually things you can do today, and there's a lot of things there that you can still do. So I think a lot of people are flip-flapping back a little bit. What we do see on the Scope 3, and I think that's also the point, it's not just around paying a premium for these new technologies and zero carbon fuels. That is for something a little bit down the line. But I think there's a lot of things you can do already today. And that's my main message for today is like, look at your carbon footprint today and see what you can do today. And a lot of the times it's just making a commitment that is helping you to reduce. And this could be signing a contract for a number of years that people can actually put an investment against, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's more the way you look and work together, where you can actually already start making some impact, than just talking about endlessly who's going to pay the green premium, right?
So there's a bit, and we've got questions coming in, so I'm going to go to those. Please use the Q&A box. I'm seeing you in the chat. I will try and get to those, but if you can use Q&A, that would be great. It is around that kind of discussion that people are having with their suppliers and their customers, often with historic kind of strategic relationships. And understanding, the emissions today and what they can work on to reduce those down. And if you look at the material impact of that on the sector level, it's kind of small, because you've got the same people with already relatively low footprint running, maybe the most efficient ships, maybe with the most efficient routes, talking about some of these reductions. And meanwhile, you have a whole heap of emissions somewhere else that isn't even part of that. I mean, we're certainly grappling with that. Are you?
No, of course I am. And we're getting the same question, right? Because if you see what's being moved around in the world, there's still 1 billion tons of coal being moved around, right? So let's talk about the emissions. So yeah, you have some of these notions, which is like, okay, so where do you start? And I think what is important is to get going, right? I don't think there is a switch that we can just all flip and then we're going to be green tomorrow. So it needs to come from incremental things all over the place. I do think it's also important what we see from a lot of listed companies to be able to have some stories out there that you're actually doing something, right? And just talking about your plans by 2040 or by 2050, well, that starts raising some questions as well, because everybody says, but what are you actually doing today? And I think that's why I come back to that point. I think in your Scope 3 emissions, there's actually still a lot of things you can do. So in my mind, it's a missed opportunity. Is Scope 3 only going to bring you to where you need to be? Of course not.
Do you? They've got a question in that's come in. Do you think we've already achieved peak transportation? I guess that means whether you're looking locally or globally. But I think it leads into another question, which is, I guess people have a choice, right? You can, for aluminum, it's about whether you choose to consume the aluminum or not. For shipping, if you don't move, do you think that people will start to say, well, do you know what? I'm going to ship local. We're going to start to have strategic relationships locally rather than this globalized flow.
Well, I think it's clear that the whole decarbonization drive is not just going to change the fuel that we use and the rest is going to be business as usual. I think that's something I don't believe in. So shipping will dramatically change. So I think there's a lot more point to point. It's going to be scaled up, et cetera, et cetera. So that is one. The global versus local, then you also very quickly get into the debate on the price on carbon, right? And shipping, there is no price on carbon. And yes, there's going to be a European scheme coming, et cetera, part of the ETS. But if you start putting a significant price on pollution, I'm not sure if some of the trade flows will still happen, or you are going to see some more local supply chains being developed. So that is one piece. I'm not even going to touch it too much today, but then there's also the whole geopolitical angle to it, which is clearly driving to more local focus than global focus. So yes, I think there's absolutely something around the global versus local. Having said that, you can't push local too much and become so inefficient that it doesn't make sense anymore, right? So I think there is probably a balance between the two.
We have a question actually related to that cost and who's kind of paying, and you might not want to go as specific at this, but the question has come from Vishal from Alba about the costs implications for alumina import with the standards imposed. I'm going to kind of broaden that out a little bit and say, who's going to pay for these things? Is it going to be that market green premium, or is it about capital flows as well? And maybe can you talk a little bit about the discussions that are maybe happening with lenders and others to access capital to realize these changes?
Well, I think there's a multiple of things happening here, right? So on the one hand, it's clear that the green premium needs to be paid somehow, partly by the end user. I think BCG had a study. I'm not sure if you've seen that, but it tries to put this into dollars for the end user, and I think they're talking about 50 cents on a pair of shoes, $500 I think for a car. So that part of that is from there, and these numbers don't look crazy. On the other hand, you're going to get some taxes, right, in the end of the day, and the ETS scheme is clear. If you're in Europe as of 23, you're going to pay a carbon tax on your shipping piece. So that is going to come. So that's partly going to somehow offset that green premium. And then I think coming back on the lending side, yes, I think we are going to see a part of the industry where if you're not going onto the green kind of agenda, you're not going to have access to capital. That is happening. There is the Chicago Charter is for the chartering side, but there's also something which is called the Poseidon Principles for banking, where people are actually measuring their footprint in their portfolios, and they're actively using that to allocate future capital as well. And you start seeing it in the insurance industry as well. They also just started with a similar thing. So it all starts with people trying to understand their footprint, creating the transparency. And I'm sure that's going to get used in decision making. Now, are we going to have most likely a 2 or 3 tiered market? I would think so. And there's probably still going to be a part of the industry which will be substandard, will be having access to capital, and might not go as fast as we need to go. But I think that's just going to be the reality, that we're going to have some front movers and some laggers. And it's up to everyone to decide in which group you want to be, I guess.
Well, so it's interesting. You mentioned the Poseidon Principles in our discussions with lenders that are starting to happen. They are being brought up as a kind of a standard to, or as a kind of an approach that the aluminum sector might wish to follow. And certainly we're looking at ways in which ASI's performance standard can be used in the issuing of green capital, low carbon, driven by low carbon, but actually to expand the discussion to ESG more broadly, given that these are not carbon specific issues, it's sustainability issues writ large. So that's a very interesting area that we're going into. Is that part of the shipping industry's focus as well? Or is it all just GHGs? I know we hear GHGs all the time, but we have to always open it up. I don't know how you guys.
No, I think you're right, and I think it was probably 90% decarb. It's also the largest challenge out there. It's a common challenge with other industries, right? In the end of the day, so it's well, open up the newspaper and you see it. So it's clearly that there's a lot of attention there, but there's still, and that's also under the GMF where I'm quite involved in, and also on RightShip where we actually a shareholder I'm also very involved in, is also trying to shine light on the other ESG topics, right? And safety is a big one. Safety at sea, it's still one of the more dangerous professions in the world. So there's clearly things to be done. There's still substandard ships, and there's a lot of things we can do there. And then, of course, the whole COVID situation has been shining a light on a bit of the darker side of the industry, which is somehow the working conditions for these people at sea. And we've had people not being able to get off board of ships for more than a year, sometimes even a year and a half, and sometimes not even with access to the home front via internet, etc., etc. So that has been something that is been ridiculous in the end of the day, that these people still don't have the status of essential workers, and that's basically what they are. But we haven't still been able as a society to cater for that. So yes, we're looking a lot at that, and also creating, and it comes back to this transparency, and this is what RightShip, for instance, has been doing for many years on safety, is trying to create transparency around safety. How can I compare asset A with asset B, and what do we know on owner 1 versus owner 2? And the same is starting to happen now on the human rights at sea. A lot of people call it like that. Topics as well is people with self-assessment, how they pay their crew, how they treat their crew. Because up to now, that was very unclear. And the interesting thing is now the end user, including ourselves, are starting to ask questions and impose standards. And so yes, the issue is getting broader than decarbonization. I would say mainly around safety and human rights for us. Of course, the whole ship recycling, and I know we had a quick chat before on that, is on that agenda as well. But for people like us, it's a bit more complicated to have a real impact on that, because we're quite far away from that, because the recycling takes place on the end of the lifetime of a ship. And normally we tend to have a fleet which is on average 4 or 5 years old. So it's a bit complicated to do that. You can put all kind of language in contracts, but by the time it gets to the recycling, that language is already gone many times. So it's difficult to have a real impact there, but it's something that is still on our radar screen.
So with your focus on the use phase, then your ability to kind of affect change now, are you doing any work on and you talked before about kind of green corridors and where there was wind and isn't wind. Is there any analysis been done on adaptation to a changing climate and what the seas might look like over the next 15, 20 years, and how your technologies might evolve to cope with that?
Yeah, and that's the wind one, right? What you see going forward is wind should be still around, so that makes us quite comfortable. There is, of course, a lot of questions that if we don't make progress on the climate thing, what does it mean for ports? What does it mean for certain countries? And of course, that is on top of our mind. But it's a little bit difficult to really turn that into actions right now. But we are starting to get a lot of traction as well from a lot of the seaports actually asking us questions on this topic, because also they want to get a little bit more clarity on what getting into their ports and what they can do to actually help avoid a climate disaster, basically.
Yeah, I mean, we're certainly focused a bit more on adaptation as well as mitigation. We have projects with the International Aluminium Institute on health and safety impacts of a changing climate at our facilities, or not our, but the industry's operations and local communities. So it's certainly an area that we're increasingly, I think, going to be looking at. There's some questions come in. Anonymous attendee Jan, you mentioned the study on consumer green premiums. Can you share where to find it? Perhaps, Jan, after this call, we could send out links to all of the initiatives you're talking about today.
I'll have a look at that and make sure that's available.
Fantastic, thank you. And another question from an anonymous attendee: would the EU taxonomy be really helping the discussion in judging the true sustainable shipping activities? So I'm not au fait with taxonomy as it relates to shipping.
It's a huge, it's a huge topic, right? And Europe tried to pull its weight. I think everybody's been frustrated that the IMO haven't been able to put a carbon scheme in place, which we all somehow know we need, and not just to raise the money for all these new initiatives and to tax somehow the fossil fuels, but also just to get going on something, right? And I think they've taken the stance of starting to include shipping under the ETS, which I don't think is a bad thing to at least get going. But yeah, there's a lot of issues in there. It's how you collect it, how do you calculate it? Then you get to the whole discussion, should LNG be seen as a green fuel or not? So it gets complicated very quickly. I just want to stay a little bit away from all the details, and I'm a strong believer that over time they will iron themselves out, and we just need to get going. And I don't think we can blame the EU for at least taking the lead on some of these topics.
You mentioned before about the partnerships and about these, the discussions that were happening. I guess today this is the first exposure that I've had to the work that shipping is doing. What can the aluminum sector do in the next kind of 5 years or so to start to accelerate some of these changes? What is it just about getting around the table with the bulk, with the bauxite producers, or is there something else that can be done by the aluminum sector?
Well, I don't know the sector so well, so just some observations. I think I think what has worked in shipping is somehow have an independent body, and I think this forum can actually be that independent body to getting people together and start getting people comfortable in somehow sharing ideas and ambitions and somehow get going, right? Because you need something a bit independent to do that. And I think that is one thing I would do. The other thing that I think has been very important for us is make sure that you include the other people from the supply chain in those discussions, right? You're not alone. And I think the end user is a very big part of that. And I think it will be a mission to not somehow try to pull in that end user. And because what we've learned here is we're not going to make any progress if we're not going to turn this into some bigger partnerships, including end users. It cannot be that all the risk of the decarb is just landing on one piece of the supply chain, and that's just not going to work.
I mean, that's something that we grapple with as the value chain approach is expanded, right? And certainly in the latest iteration of our standards, there was a lot of discussion around how you could have implementation of the standard by folks often far downstream, SMEs essentially. If the environmental burden of the product that they are bringing into their operations is everyone in that chain's consideration, they have an important role to play. But how do you motivate those SMEs, and that's a question that's come in, to calculate their carbon footprints or to have these discussions when often they are very small organizations?
Yeah, that is true. I do think it comes back to this transparency, right? And I think if you have transparency, and we also very candidly within Cargill 5-6 years ago, we said, you know what, let's create the transparency ourselves, because otherwise somebody else is going to do it for you. And I strongly believe that the transparency is going to increase, it's not going to decrease. So I think this is going to come. Even the smaller people are going to get the questions. I think the reality, though, is, and that's the same in shipping, the burden to get going is going to be on the larger companies and the more progressive companies. You're not going to get every single owner on the same wavelength, and I think, to be honest, that is okay for now. And if you can have a regulation that somehow sets the minimum standard at least, and then you have a group of people really trying to lead, I think as an industry that is probably the reality of today.
Do you publish your data, your emissions data?
Yeah. So we, if you look at the Cargill side, it's interesting. We started in 2017 in our corporate social responsibility report, which is more than just emissions. So just to come back on what we said earlier, we created transparency and say, you know what, this is us. This is the start of the journey. We're gonna get things right. We're gonna get things wrong. In the meantime, we had to change one report because we found out that we had mistakes in our emissions data early on. And I think everybody accepted that, because at least we said, you know what, this is what we are. We're starting this, and this is a journey. And now this is turning into an industry kind of practice with the Sea Cargo Charter, where we now have 34 companies signed up. And we're going to have the first publication in June, which is going to be interesting, because I think where people are always afraid of signing up on these kind of initiatives, that it becomes a league table, right? It's like, oh, I'm better than you, or that one is better than that one. And we're really trying to stay away from it, because every subsector of the industry is slightly different. Everyone's business is slightly different. And I'm sure that in your space, that's the same. If your plants are in a certain region, they're going to be, by definition, different than plants in another region, right? So that's just going to be the reality. And we just want to make sure that people see that this is just the start. This is really a journey we're on. This is the starting point. And also, I think for me, the biggest success for the Sea Cargo Charter in the first year has been not so much that the amount of people we signed up, but just the amount of data that is now flowing, because owners are now reporting their emissions data. So we have thousands and thousands of voyages with data now. And I think that is a great starting point. And from there, we can move on. We can get better. We're probably going to change the ambition 6 times. We're going to find out new technologies that we haven't heard about. And that's just what it's going to be.
Are you seeing some kind of real-time tracking of some of that emissions data? I mean, I see all of these lovely images of maps of ships outside Shanghai. Are we getting to a point where you can in real time see some of that? Certainly questions are asked of Aluminium whether that can happen.
Yeah, no, so there's a couple of ways. So there is ships which are basically fitted out with sensors for real time. So that's one way. On the other hand, don't forget that there is, especially in ports, there is quite some monitoring on emissions going on already, right? And we've seen that with sulfur already, for instance. So absolutely. But I think what is more the case today is because it's difficult to really make a different decision on a ship if you got it hourly or every 5 minutes. I'm not sure if it will change your decision making. But what you see now with AES is a lot of people can see what speed you're going, where you're going, and it's very easy to put a factor on how much emission that roughly is. And what you see today, it's more modeling that people do, and then in the Sea Cargo Charter we got some real data, which is basically voyage by voyage.
Nice. I'm going to take a look at that, and I've got a technical question. How do you allocate empty ships emissions to the folks who are shipping? So let's say you ship a load of cars in one direction, go empty in the other. How do you allocate the empty bit?
Yeah, so what we've done in the Sea Cargo Charter is a clear definition of when the voyage starts and when the new one begins. That is kind of common practice in bulk shipping anyways. So it's basically when you have discharged the last one, then the new voyage basically starts. So if you're loading, say, in Brazil and the last open was in say Rotterdam, that ballast is allocated to the loading in Brazil.
Okay.
Yeah, that's kind of also how things get priced. So that's kind of in line.
Okay, and so what share of emissions of the bulk carriers is from empty ships? Is it 50? Is it 50% there and back?
No, I think it is up to 50% in certain areas. But then again, that's on the big cape sizes going into China. And if you look at the emissions per ton, it's actually very efficient because they've been scaling up so much. So it's very different. We have the luxury, I say, in bulk shipping that we can do this voyage by voyage and really create the transparency there. When you're getting into containers, it gets a lot more complicated because they don't really sail completely empty. There's always a bit of two porting, but then again, on the very large ones, sometimes they go back with empty containers, right? So I don't have a number for the industry at large, but there is certain parts where the ballast is still a big part. But then again, with new technologies, you can also minimize your fuel usage on that leg. So that even then, there's a lot of things you can do.
I think there's a corollary for us. For us, it's about internal or pre-consumer scrap loops. The fact that you're melting this metal again and again, and it's a systemic issue. And yet it brings efficiencies, right? The recycling that scrap is great and it enables you to get that material back. But systemically, that's some of the things that are going to have to change. I'd really like to talk systems, but we're almost at our 45 minutes. There've been more questions on sulfur, actually, we didn't get to. Maybe we can have some of those offline afterwards. But Jan, what I'd like to do is just to turn over to you for the last minute or so to give your kind of final thoughts. And you've talked today about the cooperation and things, but really, what for this audience today, what would you like them to take away from this session?
Yeah, no, there's a couple of things. So first of all, I think don't miss out on an opportunity to improve your Scope-free emissions. Yes, it might be a small part, but there's really things you can do. I think it also sets you in the right mindset, and I think also from a customer point of view, I think people would like to see people actually get going, and there's a lot of things you can do. And then the other thing is if you are going to focus on Scope-free emissions, make sure you understand your current footprint. So I would really encourage you to look at the transparency. I think the Sea Cargo Charter is one way. I think signing up for the Sea Cargo Charter is also, I think, very beneficial because it becomes an industry effort and you're not alone, right? And it comes back to the league table versus plugging into something bigger and also get your learnings from there, because I have to say, having these discussions with other people is actually helping you learn a lot and gives you a lot of great ideas. And then I think it's a marathon, not a sprint, right? And that's the same, I think, for your core business. It's the same for shipping. I don't think there's the switching of the flip, but I think what you can do is look at the longer term and get involved in some of these things, because I think there's a lot of new business models and everything to be developed from that. So it's not just a headache. I think it's also a huge opportunity, and I would really encourage people to look at it that way. And we're there to help. We're there to work together, because I think that's what's really needed to make progress.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Jan. Thanks for today for the 45-minute session. I think this is the beginning of a wider discussion, and I've got lots of questions, and I hope that the organizations you talked about today will add those links to the recording and share those with the audience. I'd like to thank the audience for your Q&A and for your active engagement. It's always really exciting to see the questions come in, so thank you all very much. But lastly, maybe is to thank you once again, Jan Dieleman, for this 45 minutes on, and I look forward to discussions with you in the future. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.